they got funding from X, Y, and Z VC, right? But you will hear them that they're still alive over the next number of years. And for me, I just want to be able to prove that wrong, right? I want to say that, the Philippines is a good place to start.
Hey, it's Tim. I'm here today with Mel Nava, the founder of One Export. Mel, nice to meet you and great to have you on the podcast.
Well, nice to meet you, and thanks so much for having me.
I'm super excited to have you on today. You're Filipino founder, female founder. Very rare case. There's not that many founders to begin with in the Philippines. So a female founder, I'm sure you're getting a lot of questions on how to be you, kind of to put it in context. So tell me a little bit about yourself. How did you become an entrepreneur?
So I'm Mel. I started basically my career in the exporting business. So I was selling, if you're familiar with the brand Lucky Me, so it's the Filipino version of Indomie, basically. Like it's
Okay,
dry and wet noodles, right? And I used to
right.
sell, yeah. So I used to sell that in like in Europe and in America and in Australia as well. And so like when I left that job after 3 years, of learning everything, basically the question I had in my head was, why is it so difficult for small businesses to export, right? Or why is it difficult for
Mm,
the Philippines to be exporting? And a lot, obviously there are a lot of factors, and one would be the fact that even if we had a large diaspora, a lot of the products are not really known mainstream. A lot
mm-hmm,
of it had to do with the compliances and the costs to export. Just shipping is unbelievably so high. So,
mm.
it came to a point where I was like, well, why don't I solve it, right? Since I was in this space and I was so passionate about small and medium businesses, because I ran a small business myself and I knew the pain points of small businesses. So I kind of wanted to solve that. And that was kind of like what really started me into getting into entrepreneurship.
Very cool story for sure. So you went from working in export for a specific brand to building your own company. So you must have seen something that told you I need to do this because it's not being done properly. So walk me through your thinking. This was already in 2016 that you started One Export, right? So what was the rationale behind starting your own business? And before we get into that, actually, there's something that I really want to ask is in the Philippines, it depends, what your family background is, but entrepreneurship is not super glorified yet, right? At the time in 2016. So it must have been tricky to want to start a company and to explain that to your family. So, open question there.
Sure. So let me answer that question first before I go to the question you asked before. So actually, when I graduated college, 2011, right, and the curriculum back in college was they were trying to make sure that you were groomed so well for corporate, right? So basically, like the jobs
Mm-hmm.
that were glorified straight out of college were if you worked for a large conglomerate in the Philippines or if you worked for a multinational company. So the bigger the pay of that particular multinational company, people would think, oh, you're really good because you got into this company. And eventually, like I had peers that eventually worked there for the rest of their lives, and it was something that of course we all respect, right? I mean, of course there is good money in the corporate world. I always wanted to solve problems, right? And to solve problems within the realm of scope I was given. So for example, I was in exporting. I was fortunate enough to have a boss that was very, very supportive in terms of being or having an entrepreneurial mindset. So, back then he would tell us, even if you're working for a large company, he would tell us, like, well, why don't you think of this as your own business? And if this was your own business, then what will you do?
Mm-hmm.
So he will give us liberty to say, try on different projects or see if there's a particular customer segment that we can serve. So those were things that just having an entrepreneurial mindset while you're in corporate allowed me to really think. There were also instances when I was in corporate. I would meet people, like exporters, but on the side they would manufacture clothes. And so my boss kind of allowed me to like have a side business. I'd have a side hustle where I would sell clothes on the weekend, and I will work from Monday to Friday, right? And so that also made me a better employee, because I really cared about, I knew how to run a business, and therefore I wouldn't also just spend money just because it was a larger conglomerate in the Philippines. So that was something that I think I truly valued. I don't think a lot of people in corporate here in the Philippines have those kinds of bosses, because of course they would want their employees to have their own, like, to be very committed to the company, work maybe from 9 until forever, 9 till midnight, right? And not ever have a life outside of that. But I was fortunate enough that my former boss tried to instill an entrepreneurial mindset, but also made sure that we looked at it from an entrepreneur perspective, and that was kind of why um towards the end of my career in corporate, that I really wanted to start a business, and I was convinced to start a business.
Very inspiring story for sure. And I love that your boss had that mindset. That's something that I'm always trying to apply in my own businesses, is make sure that our employees know that, it's a structure where we, promote entrepreneurship, push them to have their own ideas, and even encourage them to come up with their own business initiatives in the future. So I love that you had a boss like that. I think it's really key, and probably something to aspire for. If you're an employee looking for a place to work because you don't have an idea yet, look for a boss that has that type of mindset, right? I think that's a good idea.
Yeah, for
And how
sure.
about your family? How did they react to you building a business?
So, my parents were actually in corporate. My dad works for a pharma company. My mom works for, like, a fast food. They were both in finance, and so actually, so entrepreneurship also within the family was not necessarily encouraged, because they made so much money from being in corporate, and it was such a safe and secure lifestyle, right? Whereas, like, if you were to be an entrepreneur,
Mm-hmm.
right, nothing is ever stable. But I think what I told myself was, I was young enough to, like, quit and try something, right? But not too old where I had a lot of responsibilities. Like, I did not have a child. Well, I still don't have a child. I was not married.
Mm-hmm.
And so that was something where, that was a point in my life where I told myself, if I try this, say, and then maybe in 2 or 3 years, if it doesn't work, I can go back to corporate, but at least I have given myself a shot to try entrepreneurship, right? And so that was something where that was kind of the point in my life where I decided to, like, just try it, because you know um I mean, what was interesting also is it's different, right? Because I come from a family of people in corporate. I also, were friends with people whose families ran family businesses. These were mostly, like, Filipino Chinese, right? Where
Mm-hmm.
really their definition of success is if you're able to start a business. And I had a lot of those. I had a lot of those
Mm-hmm.
friends, and they would really, like, tell me and encourage me to, like, start it, because I mean, that's kind of the only way I could tell if something will be truly successful, right? And so that was also very encouraging, and so that was kind of why I jumped ship. And I basically told my dad, like, I think I sat with him one Sunday, and I told him, I'm gonna move back home. I'm gonna ask for an allowance because I'll need money to pay my bills, and I will need you to support me, right? And I said, if this doesn't work in, say, 2 or 3 years, I am committed to pay you whatever back. So I guess my parents were shocked at first when I told them that I was going to go into entrepreneurship, because nobody really went into entrepreneurship in my family. And eventually they just said, why don't you do it, and, like, let's see and take it from there. And I would say they're also, I mean, I'm lucky enough to be in a position. I mean, in entrepreneurship in the Philippines is basically a privilege, right? And not a lot of people talk about that. So I was privileged enough that I didn't have a lot of responsibilities, and I did have a very supportive family that decided, okay, you should do this head on. But it's something in terms of privilege that I understand. You can't always advise to jump ship all the time. And so I understand also why generally, not a lot of entrepreneurs are made here, right? Because there's a lot of responsibility. Some people are considered breadwinners, right? And obviously, if it works out, then great,
Yep.
right? I mean, it's definitely a privilege I do not take lightly. And again, as I said,
Okay.
if there are people that wanna be entrepreneurs in the company, I eventually encourage them, like after of obviously being able to save, or if they need mentorship or whatever, I'm able to do those. But entrepreneurship generally is a privilege, and I was just happy that my family was just very, very supportive.
That's actually some interesting stuff. I've, obviously spoken to a lot of entrepreneurs in Southeast Asia, and it seems to be a common theme that there's the breadwinner. Usually, the kids who are sent to college will have to then support the family. So they don't have the luxury of starting a business because the risks are way too high. And being, the whole goal of this podcast is to encourage more people, Southeast Asian people, to start building their own businesses or to attract foreigners into Southeast Asia to start companies. My biggest question always is, how do we bring more Southeast Asians to building businesses and kind of overcoming this this hurdle of being the breadwinner and not being able to take risk? Is it, do we create more incubators where startups or aspiring founders are able to be supported financially for a certain duration, because we have a few of them but not enough probably? Or does it go through companies like yours and other startups in the ecosystem promoting entrepreneurship to within their employees? I think that's a really cool concept to look into. So I don't know if you have any thoughts on that.
Yeah, sure. I mean, for us, again, so our context was when I started, and this was like in 2016, 2017. Nobody was really investing in the Philippines. Like, it was
Hmm.
just
Do
impossible.
I know
So
it?
yeah, for sure, right? But so I guess for us, we started where we needed to make money. So I guess like we needed to make money on the onset, right? I wasn't gonna quit my job if we weren't going to make money. So we started off like as a consulting type where it's like, okay, we'll be your export like slave, and like we'll do everything for you, but you have to pay us enough where we could at least take out a salary in the next 3 months, right? And so that was kind of how we started. I would suggest that for people who are actually breadwinners, right? Like to not quit your job until you feel like you're really actually making some decent amount of cash. And you could start as simple as like a D2C startup where like you're selling, for example, I don't know, some food item, right? It doesn't have to be super sexy. It doesn't have to be like AI or crypto where, people like these tech buzzwords, are sexy, but it has to make money. And so I think
Hmm.
that was one, because for us, I had a co-founder that, I mean, I don't think he was privileged enough to really, really start a business. And so I was always looking out after him, right? And it's like, how can I at least give him some cash while we're building the startup where he can pay bills, right? So that's one, right? Um, I think the ecosystem in Southeast Asia has changed and has been very, very supportive. Indonesia is obviously taken the lead in terms of like the number of startups, the number of ecosystems, the number of incubators you have, the number of angel investors. I believe the Philippines is also starting to have that level of incubators and that community, at least in Southeast Asia, at least in the developing areas, in the developing parts. You could see that people genuinely want to help build the ecosystem to have more startup winners. We're not, the Philippines in general, I wouldn't say it's there yet. It's there completely, but it's starting to get there. And you would see this
Hmm.
in the number of companies that are funded, in the number of companies that survive the pandemic, in the number of companies that are able to, bootstrap their way through before the next funding round, or just not dying. And so you see that, and I think it's starting to be able to get more trust. But I guess as founders in general, it's you know for us when we started, and again we started with no tech, the reason why we got money was also because we were solving a really, really hard problem in Southeast Asia, right? We're trying to solve
Hmm.
exporting or cross-border trade or shipping to be easier and more cost effective. And so ideally, if you solve that hard of a problem, you won't have if you were solving this in, say, the US, you probably won't have a lot of customers. But in Southeast Asia, where the pain point is so hard and difficult and costly, people will really go to whatever it is that makes sense for their pocket and for their time, right? And so that's what I feel like. Southeast Asia still has a lot to offer. It's still very, it's still very young, and it's still very fresh. And you can just throw an idea where you feel like you could solve something, but you really, really have to solve something, because people could feel that, right? Your customers can feel that, and your customers will tell you, will tell the next customer you should use this. And so that's how we've been able to grow with very little money. But that's also how we continue to, solve problems and make it better on an everyday basis, right?
That's awesome. Yeah, I was reading on a blog about your successes early on, getting funding from your clients. I think that's super smart and very specific. And I also agree on the idea of sort of creating cash flow early from not necessarily a sexy startup. Both of my first companies were, kind of boring service businesses that helped me finance my startup vision. So completely agree on all points. And I think these are really good pointers for anyone wanting to start something. Don't necessarily go after the sexy startup status. Go after something that makes money, generate cash flow, and then you can finance your dreams. Awesome tips. So, now that it's been a certain number of years, I think almost 8 years you've been in business. Can you tell me a little bit more about how you guys are doing? And if you don't mind, just for anyone who doesn't know your business, give us a few words on what exactly you do and how the business model operates.
Okay, so yeah, so we're one export. So initially, I started this again because I was in the exporting industry, and we called it one export because we wanted to be the one-stop end-to-end platform for anything export. Now we've expanded to anything cross-border trade, so that could be import or export. We started with a pain point of compliance. So basically, because I was in the export market, and some of the cases I had to deal with back when I was working for a big large noodle company was, the compliances per market, right? So for example, this food color is not allowed in the US, whereas you have to declare it differently in Australia. And so I wanted to be able to find a way to simplify that for a lot of small and medium businesses, right? Because small and medium businesses cannot sell if they're not compliant, right? So we initially started with the compliance aspect of small businesses in the Philippines, and then obviously now we're in Indonesia. Um, and then ideally, so that they can be uh, attractive, when buyers abroad are able to purchase items from Southeast Asia. The second aspect was trade, where we bring small businesses to either online or offline marketplaces around the world, right? Not locally, but like if you want to say, go to an Amazon, or if you want to go to an Asian store in the UK, we're able to bring you. And that was kind of how we initially set the company up, where if you're a small business from Southeast Asia, ideally I could bring you anywhere with compliance and just connecting you to a buyer. Over the pandemic, and thank God, for all of these ideas that happened during the pandemic. Over the pandemic, our customers were actually reaching out to our Facebook page, or or telling us, because you're already selling to all of these markets, why don't you ship for us, right? And I mean, logistics was not necessarily something that I looked into back in 2016, right? I never thought of myself as a logistics company because that was not my background. But because we had the compliance aspect, we said, okay, we'll now ship for you. And that was kind of like when the transaction counts increased. And now we're shipping to over 70 markets around the world. 100% port
Wow,
clearance
that's amazing.
from Philippines and Indonesia to the rest of the world, right? So that's kind of like where we are now. We opened our Indonesia office in 2022. And so now we're in four markets. We operate in four markets: Singapore, Philippines, Indonesia, and the US. And we intend to open in three more markets within the year, hopefully.
That's super
Ideally,
exciting.
yeah, if all things considered, and if I have all of ideally, I should have all of this energy till the end of the year. We should be open in more markets, and ideally that will make trade and shipping much easier than it is today. So for small medium businesses in Southeast Asia. So that's kind of what we
Cool.
do
So
in.
super ambitious. I love it. That's I mean, success story from the Philippines, you know. There's not that many, so we'll take everything we can. I'm also, you know, from the startup world in the Philippines, so you know,
Yes.
I can really appreciate how hard it is to build something from there. Actually, I'd love to hear your thoughts on sort of the landscape in the Philippines. We totally agreed that in 2016, when we also started TendoPay, getting money in the Philippines was basically impossible. Everyone was focused on Indonesia, as you so eloquently said. How do you think it's evolved, and how does it feel, the landscape to start a business and also the funding landscape in the Philippines? What are your thoughts?
Okay, so the landscape to start a business here, again, in the Philippines, it's very, very. So let me say that again. So in the Philippines, it's not that difficult to start, right? I mean, you yourself, you're a foreigner, you went to the Philippines, you started a buy now, pay later. Obviously, now it's a different app, but it's a financing app. And you could generally get the licenses you need, right? I
Mm-hmm.
think the more important part is solving that difficult problem, right? And I can attest to this. If you solve a really hard problem, and you're able to deliver in terms of service, right? Service quality. Like, when we were starting it, we didn't even have tech. We were starting with like people calling us over the phone, and we were like just, telling people how to do this over the phone or over Zoom, right? And,
Love it. Love it.
people were just very happy with the way that we served them. We delivered the things they needed for export, whether that be their FDA or whether they were able to sell them abroad. And, people started talking about us. And, now I think we're the go to for like anything exports, right? um if you solve that problem, I think you could succeed. And it's that solving that problem properly, with the right service quality, with all that you've got basically, and you will get people's trust and get people's recommendations, right? So I think it's that needs to be solved in the Philippines, because there are a lot of foreigners coming to the Philippines and are very, very successful because they're able to do just that, right? So I
Mm-hmm.
think that's one. I would say competition uh is, so obviously, like, if it's easy to copy, you will have a lot of competition. So if you wanted to build a food business, or if you wanted to build a clothing business, because that's easy to copy, you would have a lot of competition. But again, going back to, if you solve a hard problem, you will likely not have a lot of competition. And so for us, at least, like, you know nobody really does things end to end, right? And nobody is able to really scale in terms of like, if you wanted to ship so many other different varieties of products, right? So we're able to do that, really just because of, solving the hard things first, right? And so I think if you want to come into the Philippines as, a new founder, or if you are in the Philippines wanting to start your own business, one thing I would really recommend is you have to have like certain domain expertise in something, right? So the reason why people trust me with exporting is because I've shipped to how many different markets abroad, and they could see right through you. These businesses, they are not, they may not have all of the services they need, but they are not dumb. They know if you're like
Mm-hmm.
lying, or if you are just, trying to get their business or trying to get their money, and they will not give you their money if they cannot trust you. So it there's a lot of like relationship building, but there's also a lot of like making sure you deliver everything that is right and on time, and with better service quality than anyone else for them to move. And I think that's a really, really big opportunity in the Philippines. Whereas, say, if you go to a more mature market, I would say Indonesia's a little more mature than the Philippines. You would have more competition here in Indonesia than in the Philippines. But again, at least you already have that infrastructure. People could just,
Mm-hmm.
could understand, right? Could understand why they will choose your service over the others. So that's something that I feel like
Yeah,
is different.
I know what you mean. I think like Philippines is a very different market because a lot of, like, outside of the Philippines, let's say in North America, the Western world, a lot of business decisions are made based on rational reasoning, because there's an infrastructure, there's an understanding that X will deliver Y, and that's your ROI, right? In the Philippines, you just mentioned it earlier, it's very relationship based, right? So even if you can prove a certain ROI, or you can prove the rationale behind a service or a product you're offering, you need to build that relationship, and it makes things quite slow, right? But it does work. That's how the Philippines was built, and it's very functional. So it's something that as a foreigner we had to learn the hard way, and it took us how many years to figure out that, B2B sales was not going to be the like typical product demo, ROI pitch, and then signing them on. It's going to be like a long process to build a relationship. And, people like to take their time to understand what you're offering, who you are again, et cetera, et cetera. So very cool insights. And I can, I completely understand them. And I totally agree with you on that.
Yeah, I mean
Very
it's
cool.
yeah, it's I think it's once you get their trust, it's easy
Hmm.
for a business to recommend you, right? But you have to
That's
get
true.
that. You have to earn that trust. It's not given
Yep.
to you, it's earned.
I agree. And are you from Manila, by the way?
Yes, I am from Manila. I was born and raised in Manila. Yes.
All right, cool. So you have probably lots to say about Manila, but if you had to sell Manila to someone who's never been, like, what would you say about it?
I would say that it is a fairly interesting landscape. It is, it has the charm of, like, being colonized by, the Europeans and the Americans. So it's like we're good English speakers. We there is so much good talent in the Philippines, right? And there's so much passion. Like, I would also say the Philippines has probably the best salesman I have ever met in my life. Like, I
Interesting.
mean, I compare this to, like, say, Southeast Asia, you know, because the Philippines are generally performers. Like, when you're a kid, you're on Christmas parties, you're expected to sing for your family members, even if your voice is not great like mine. So what's interesting is, because we're such performers, Philippines is such good salespeople. So if you need somebody in business dev or in customer service, they are the ones that could help you close, and they're the ones that could actually, help calm a customer down. And that's something that I don't
Mm,
necessarily see in the rest of Southeast Asia. I don't know for you, but you may see that in Thailand. But I think in the Philippines, they have a particular way or a particular charm to get a sale. And so that's something that I find very interesting. English is obviously another nice, good way to start in the Philippines. But I think it's, again, the market is not yet saturated, right? The
mm.
market is still
But business
open.
aside, let's say someone wants to establish themselves in Manila. How do you sell it? What is the big appeal with Manila?
I would say traffic, because traffic sucks. We're the
Yeah,
worst.
don't mention traffic.
But I would say, like, people are dynamic. They are trainable and teachable. And like, very, very, very welcoming and warm, right?
That's true.
You cannot, if you want to start something, or even if you just want to hang out, there are, like, the nicest people. You will probably not get, and if you say get lost or somebody scams you, other people will go out of their way to help you out. And so that's something that I really, like, believed in the Philippines. It's such a nice feeling to be home, just because of
Hmm.
the people is really what makes it. And I would say good food, depending, they're maybe not the healthiest food in Southeast Asia. Maybe Vietnam has healthier food, Indonesia has healthier food than the Philippines, but I would say the Philippines has a lot of, like, good, Spanish influenced food that is really, really good as well. And I think just
Hmm.
generally, there is, like, such a big market outside of Metro Manila, right? Like, there's,
True.
like, if you go to the provinces, it's very, very nice, and maybe almost virgin or pristine, that you could really visit. There are different qualities of people that make up that particular province, that whose problem you would like to solve, but also, like, just they're just genuinely nice human beings, I think.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. Like the people really make the country, right? Oh, it's a super beautiful, like you mentioned, the provinces, the south, the islands, the beaches. It's all really beautiful out there.
Why did you go to Manila?
Um, why did I choose to go to Manila? Well, basically, I had another business before starting Tendo Pay. It was an ad tech business, so we were selling advertising solutions to North American firms. I was based in Toronto, and we needed a large talent pool of developers that we couldn't find in Toronto. At the time, it was still Flash development, so quite a niche skill. And developers in Toronto had already transitioned away from Flash, so we had to find people that would do it for us. And my partner and I, we were looking for freelancers online, and we tried out several countries, and Philippines was one of the countries. And I didn't know anything about the Philippines at the time, so for me it was like all new. And then when I realized that the guys we had hired were fluent in English, to your point, extremely hardworking, very talented, and quite cost efficient, I started to like investigate the Philippines a lot more. And one thing led to another. And over the period of 4 years, we grew a team of 30 people in the Philippines. So I was traveling the same way you're traveling to Indonesia. I was traveling to Manila very often from Toronto. And I got to know the country. I got to know the city, and I got to know, as small as it was at the time, the founder community in Manila. And through that networking, we discovered there were many opportunities in the country. And I got pitched to work on Tendo Pay at the time as a consultant, and that solidified into a co-founder position very quickly. And then I moved to Manila full time. So I have quite a long experience with the Philippines myself.
But also fast growth. I think that's one thing you just mentioned. Like Manila is
Yep,
super fast. Like you would be
very
shocked
true.
even with the traffic that it's just like when the day before is so different from the day after, right? And it's really like
That's
just
true.
because Manila
It's
could pick up that.
fast paced city for sure. Fast paced city. So, do you see any trends? Like, I'm trying to follow the startup community and industry in general in Southeast Asia. But as you know, every country is super different, and you can talk about it in terms of the differences between Philippines and Indonesia for your company. I'm just curious where you see the trends in the Philippines going in terms of the startup scene. I know that fintech was one of the big component of the startup ecosystem for the last few years. With Gcash Maya, TendoPay, and companies like that that had kind of to revolutionize the tech. But where are things going? You mentioned AI earlier. Are you seeing things in AI in the Philippines, or what's your stance on everything?
Okay, so yeah, so I super understand this because I've been like in the space for so long, right? So you would have your say your first fintech version. So like your coins.ph, your AccuDeans, right? The first people that basically got investment in a 2015, 2016, right? But compared to like say the rest of Southeast Asia, we didn't really have like super big wins, right? We didn't have 100, 300, $500 million exits, right? So that's why I kind of like the Philippines was always like undermined, I would say, in terms of a market, even if we are the second largest population. Like people just never really looked at it just because like
Mm-hmm.
they didn't see the potential. And so you see that drought within like 2016 to like 2020, like, and you were probably during that time, right? It's like very small community, but like
Yes.
no money. There really is no money. And then in the
Mm-hmm.
2021s, between 2021, where you would have these four, Filipino Americans or Filipino Europeans that come back from studying abroad and they come back to the Philippines and they launch their own funds. So you would have the Skya, Foxmont, um, and obviously Wavemaker for they're based in like Filipino America or Filipino, I would say expats or like Filipino Singaporeans that are now based in all of these other markets. They come back to give back, right? And so they try to invest in different Philippine startups. And that was kind of when you would see the tick in not just fintech, I would say you would also see the tick in logistics, you would see the tick in e-commerce, and you would see, the numbers of startups being funded this time increase in over the next couple of years, right? But again, in terms of trends, I think in starting 2020, 2021, which is kind of like when Tendo Pay was also like starting out, you would see the fintechs being funded. And then I think in 2022, you would see the cryptos or Web 3.0s being funded in the Philippines, right? Um, I think now mainly because also of you know, the interest rates in the US and these startups just closing left and right. People are now looking at more traditional businesses. So traditional businesses that make money, right? And even, I think in the Philippines we, because
Mm-hmm.
of our influence in, our heavy influence in the United States, they're now looking at gross profit in terms of businesses, which is like really a great time for us because it's like finally it took so long for us to get there. Like when I talk to people about exporting, or if I talk to people about cross-border trade and compliances, they normally look at me with just like blank faces and they're like, this is not going to scale. But now it's like, you want to go to an Amazon, you can't go to an Amazon without us helping you become compliant for the US market. And so I think finally,
Mm-hmm.
we're finally back to basics in the Philippines. It's really about who makes a lot of gross profit. What are your numbers? And generally, I think Filipino banks, and you would know this, Filipino bankers, um, because of the different crises in the 1980s, or the Asian financial crisis, they're very, very conservative, right? And so, if you're
Mm-hmm.
like just a homegrown startup from the Philippines, you're likely to also be very conservative with your projections, right? You don't have like startups here asking for crazy high valuations, but also you don't have a lot of startups here dying, in the numbers, right? They may not be super, super like scalable. You won't hear them like that they got funding from X, Y, and Z VC, right? But you will hear them that they're still alive over the next number of years. And I think that's kind of like the trend where the Philippines is going into. They're looking for more sustainable and scalable startups. And I think those are things that people really invest in now. What are
Fair
your
enough. And are you like, yeah, I mean, I completely agree. I've been, I left the Philippines a little while ago, not very long, but things evolve so fast. And now I hear about all these AI companies throughout the world and Southeast Asia in particular. I mean, as you know, Singapore is becoming the fastest growing AI country in the world, faster than the US. So I'm just curious, like, I'm super interested in AI. I apply it to my personal life and to my work as much as I can. So I'm curious if the Philippines is going in that direction. And the reason I'm, wondering about it and kind of curious is because such a big component of the Filipino economy is around the BPO, so business process outsourcing, which in my view is literally what AI is tackling to solve. So I'm wondering, are Filipino companies adapting to that and leveraging it to become more efficient and cutting costs even further? Or is an entire industry going to get wiped out in the next few months because things evolve so fast? That's a huge fascination I have for that.
Sure, sure. I mean, for me, I think AI, I think is here to stay. I think a lot of small businesses, or even startups are now starting to adapt AI. I think it's really the application, right? Like creating that application that will stick, right? And I mean, there have been applications of AI. Like we also use AI for one export. Like we're able to figure out if a
What do you
product.
guys use it for?
Oh, sure. So if you want to ship abroad, we're able to tell you if this product will be able to make it through customs or not. And that's kind of like how we use AI.
Okay.
It's our own algorithm where, because we've shipped so much, we know the regulations per market. Just by looking at a product, or just by you telling us the characteristics of your product, we could tell you what particular documents you need, or what, or what, if this will be able to go through customs or not, right? And so that's very important for our
Mm-hmm.
logistics and trading aspect, like especially if you want to get into like an Amazon, or you want to get into an Asian store. So that's how we apply AI. I think the current application currently of AI for Philippine startups, it's still a little on the, it's still a little new. I don't think it's advanced as like, and I think we have to catch up, which is why, I think, we have to start creating AI for the BPO industry because they will be affected, right? And so how do you scale up that BPO
Yeah.
industry, right? And so um well, we could like talk about it. Like, I think it's something, it's a problem we need to solve because like
Hmm.
there's really no, how before chat gpt, like there, or before the iPhone, there was a life before the iPhone where people, would
Hmm.
go on their
I don't
Blackberries,
remember that.
right? But like now, the life after the iPhone, you can never imagine your life without the apps, right? And so there's
I
also
agree.
a life before chat gpt, and there's now a life after chat
Hmm.
gpt, and we really just have to adjust and adapt to it because there's no other way, right? And so I think those are areas where I think the Philippines has to catch up on. And I feel like, because I think in general, I think in the Philippines also, we're I don't know, maybe because most of the people running the country are the people in the, post World War, right? Or Gen X, who didn't really grow up with tech, or
Hmm.
didn't really, their childhood was not based in tech. There is an aversion to technology, and I think you've seen that, right? Maybe for Tendo Pay,
Hmm.
but for example, when we were starting with One Export, like, I used to go to like trade shows in the Philippines, and I would tell them, "Hey, how about you export, or how about we export your product?" And normally the version would come to like, "Well, why will I export if I'm already serving the local market?" So there's an aversion. There's a very, very strong aversion to
Hmm.
change. And I feel like, for example, if not for the pandemic
Mm.
and stores being closed and they didn't have any other channel, people wouldn't actually think about exporting, right? And so I feel like, there's the same aversion to AI, I feel, or maybe because I've been serving the more traditional space for a while. So I also know like what the feeling of some of my customers, feel like they know they, just like, for example, simple things like booking something on the platform. They would rather just talk to somebody on chat, right? And you would see that
Mm.
aversion, but I feel, and so obviously right now we're trying to do AI with that, but you could really see the aversion in terms of little things like that, right? And so I feel like we have to kind of move faster. We're a little, I wouldn't say late, but like we would be lagging behind against like a Singapore or an Indonesia, I would say. And
Yeah, or
maybe
even American companies
yeah.
solving the problems that have been exported to the Philippines to solve. And now technology can solve them a lot faster. So there's like a huge gap that I feel needs to be handled faster, sooner than later. Let's just put it that way. But you're right, like it's tough for certain countries that are a bit more traditional to adapt really quickly. But you know what, like I one thing I know about Filipinos is that they're extremely resilient, and if a challenge appears, they'll find a solution to it. So I'm not too worried in that sense, but definitely something to that I hope people are actively thinking about, and I'm pretty sure they are. So yeah.
It's the aversion, but I think we will get
Cool.
there.
Yeah, I'm hoping to. I'm hoping to. So yeah, we've talked a lot about business, Mel, and I want to know you a little bit more on a personal level. So can I ask you a few questions? It's still going to be like a professional level, but I mean, I want to know about some of the stuff you do, perhaps in work or in your personal life, that help you as an entrepreneur. One thing that I'm really curious about is like, is there an app that you use a lot? Not, and I'm not talking about like the mail app and your standard apps, but something that you've been using to improve your efficiency, or something that you just can't live without.
So I meditate every day. I think it's something I
Okay.
need. So either I put out I put out like a like depending on what I'm feeling that day, like I put out Simple Habit. So it's a meditation app that kind of works for me. So I normally put in what my mood is, and then like I meditate against that. So that's one. Because I'm in Indonesia, I'm I take drops, so I try to learn Indonesian words on an everyday
Mm,
basis. I'm not super fluent still, but it's enough for me to not die on the street, right? Like I could like
okay.
speak speak to a driver or speak to somebody selling me food, and I think that's very important. So that's another one that I use on an everyday basis. And then it's important for me to listen to the news, right? Just like at least zone out and like, maybe 30 or 40 minutes a day. I really try to understand, what's going on in Southeast Asia. And so like understand the trends, understand like growth rates, inflation rates on an, maybe not on an everyday basis, or at least on a quarter basis, understand what's really going on and how it's going to affect business and trading and logistics and everything in the long run. So that's kind of like what I'm looking at. Yeah, I think and then yeah, I guess it's pretty much it. And then most of my days are just working, trying to geek out on my customers' needs on an everyday basis. So uh that could be as simple as I try to look at like our customer service maybe once a day and see how people are answering or what questions are people asking, and like kind of
Hmm.
like go on a rabbit hole on Google or search in terms of just like, okay, so how are people currently solving this, and how can I improve that? So I'm a little addicted to that right now, and that pretty much sums my day.
It's and you're I you know what, I love that you always revert back to work and to your business. So that shows me that A, you're a very hard worker. B, you're extremely tied into your own brand. So like topics of conversation lead back to that. And it's like, so I'm an entrepreneur, and I this question I've asked myself a lot where it comes from, but most entrepreneurs have a chip on their shoulder, and that they have something to prove. What do you have you looked into that? You meditate, so maybe you've thought about it. Like, what do you think pushes you to be such a hardcore entrepreneur?
Again, I think I'll go back to the privilege that I have. And again, unfortunately, there are not a lot of successful startups in the Philippines, right? One investor actually told me this. The reason why they're not investing in the Philippines was there were no big exits, right? For female founders, especially in the Philippines, there's none on the roster of like really good startups. And, for me, I just want to be able to prove that wrong, right? I want to say that, the Philippines is a good place to start. I feel like the reason why we were able to scale in a different market was because we were solving a really hard problem in the Philippines. And so it was easy to like digest and understand in another Southeast Asian country. And for me, it's like I just also want to solve this problem. Like, why is exporting so hard from Southeast Asia? Like you can get anything you want in the US and it'll get delivered to you via
Mm-hmm.
like a box or something, right? And it's so cheap. And why is the reverse so hard? And so I just kind of want to solve that because, like, I've been in this industry for so long where it's just it shouldn't be that hard, right? But it is. And like, I
Mm-hmm.
kind of want to solve that. So that's kind of the chip on my shoulder.
Okay, fair enough. And have you figured it out? Why is it so hard?
A lot of factors. One is I think in general, Southeast Asia was never really meant to export. Or
Mm,
like we were more of like an importing region than exporting, right? Like we were always like net of imports, right? Like I guess except for Vietnam, which is really geared towards exporting, right? um we have always been an importing, everyone in Southeast Asia has always been an importing market. And I think it's something that has to do with, for example, in the Philippines, right? The reason why we're not exporting is because there are not a lot of entrepreneurs, there are not a lot of products to export, right? Um, in Indonesia, maybe the reason why people are not exporting is because they've always served the domestic market, which is already big enough. And so serving the export market is something that's new to them, right? Um, or it's something
mm-hmm.
that people don't necessarily understand. Like, for example, in Vietnam, you have industries that export, like you're talking about mobile phones or chips or rice. But if you talk about small businesses, not a lot of them export because you know, when you talk about exporting the module, or how you're taught is normally in English, and not a lot of people speak that. And so I think that's kind of like, there's so much gap in
Mm,
terms of like trying to bring Southeast Asian products to the rest of the world, right? I mean, you're from Canada and you go to an Asian store and you ask yourself, why is this so expensive versus a product from China, right? And there's so much nuts and bolts I feel like you have to fix before you get to that point. Like, China had an Alibaba, right? China had like, a whole industry supporting like logistics, which is why they're able to bring down like logistics significantly less. We're not there yet, but there's a lot of opportunity, I believe.
fair enough. Yeah, I mean, it's super exciting. It's a very big problem to solve for sure. Cool. And before I let you go, do you have shout outs you want to make to, your business or something else that you're passionate about?
I mean, well, for me, like, obviously, we shout out to the, if you need anything for cross border trade or shipping, you can just always visit our website, oneexport.com. But I mean, I would like to just shout out to like a lot of the founders in, the Philippines, who like just hustle it out on an everyday basis. It's not easy to be thriving or surviving in the Philippines, just because of, almost everything is stacked against you. Like, you don't necessarily have all the funding in Southeast Asia, or you're always like questioned in terms of
Mm-hmm.
metrics. But I think, like, I would say like the founders in the Philippines are the most hardworking people I have ever met in my life. And honestly, they're just people that, continue to inspire me. And like, it's also the reason why, you just really want to do well, and you really want to do good, right? And so, yeah.
All right. Well, that's the pod. Thank you very much, Mel, for joining me. It was a real pleasure. I hope you had fun.
I did. Thank you so much.